I'm trying. I'm trying to print,
Okay, so welcome to Bergen County, Chad. We're happy to see you all. We're happy Marcy showed up. And we just want to let you know that we have the speaker series, which is the first Monday of each month. And that next month, we're going to be having Eric Tivers. He's a podcaster and he has this great show, ADHD Rewired, and he's going to talk about supportive accountability. He started Adult Study Hall, which is for ADHD adults. And he's also fun. So Eric will be here in December. January, we're going to have Lynn Edris, who talks a lot about people reading their living up to their potential, staying focused, staying organized. She has a kind of what may feel like a different approach to getting organized. And so we've invited her. She's also has a podcast. And then in February, Carolyn McGuire who's wrote Why Will No One Play With Me? She's going to come and talk about social and emotional learning and social skills training. So that's coming up. We also have 3 support groups. One is run by Isabel Ibrahimi, and that is for adults, and that meets the 3rd Monday of each month from 7:30 to 8:30. And then we have 2 parent support groups run by Joni Korn. And for younger kids, it meets the 2nd Wednesday of each month from 8 to 9:15. And for older kids, like 7th grade and up, it's the 4th Wednesday of each month. If you have any questions, you can reach me at adhd.bergencounty@gmail.com and check out our website. We have almost every recording of every speaker who has been talking. This is since the pandemic. It's a wonderful resource. Feel free. It's available. And there's lots of topics related to kids, as well as adults, as well as families and marriage and schools and 504s. There's a lot there. So you might want to check that out. Also, if you join Chad, if you would please put Bergen County as your affiliate chapter, we get a little bit of money and that can help us with paying for some of the speakers and other supports. Or you can also support us by buying us a coffee and go to www.buymeacoffee.com/ADHD Bergen, capital N. We also have a Facebook page, so join us there. With no further ado, I welcome Marcy. And Marcy, if you want to introduce yourself or you want me to give a little spiel, it's up to you. Oh,
Thank you so much for your introduction. It's so nice for me to be here. I had been looking forward to this night for so long, and now it's here. And thankfully, I received a reminder. So I appreciate and feel very welcomed by you and appreciate your patience as well. So the title, I think, is I'm an educational therapist. I have a doctorate in cognitive diversity. I've been working for over 35 years, which I say now every year that passes, that I've been working over 35 years with clients who have a variety of learning issues. Many have had attentional issues. Many have had emotional issues relating to learning. Many have twice exceptionality, which has been my specialty, working with kids who are diagnosed as having learning issues, but who are also gifted. So I use a very individualized approach, working with individual children and also guiding their parents to really create environments that support their children, both at home and at school, as well as outside of home. So I'm going to share with you my screen, and I just need feedback that the way that I share it enables me to advance the pages. So I'm going to do that right now. What happens when I share is I lose you. So can you see my screen?
We can.
Yes. Beautiful.
Okay. So what I'm worried about is that I won't be able to advance the slides. So can you see it the way that it is without my making it a slideshow?
We can.
We can see on the left side the upcoming slides.
Yeah, I'm a little worried that if I change it to slideshow presentation, you won't see me advance. I'll give it a try, but you'll have to tell me if you see the next page start. Okay, do you see the next page?
Click slide 2, click it. Yeah, now slide 2.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay, then I did it right.
Yeah, we still have everything on the bottom, but it's fine.
Okay, yeah, well, I think this is the best we can do for now. This presentation, perfect. Say it again.
It's perfect, Marcy.
Okay. Okay.
We're good.
So this is a presentation that solely was designed to discuss slow processing speed. I had intended to include a presentation that also had active working memory. So I'll bring that in as we get to each of these slides. And then of course, save your questions so that I can address them towards the end. I'll give time for us to discuss what you're seeing in your children or your clients. So the first thing that I'd like to talk about here is that, we don't expect all children to be at the same level, to work at the same speed. And just as we don't expect every flower to look exactly the same. So what is processing speed? So processing speed is how long it takes someone to get something done. And for some people, it takes longer than others. Some people, it takes them less time. So processing speed in and of itself is not related to intelligence. It is a cognitive ability. So I'm showing you now a slide that has the constellations in the night sky. And I might ask you if you see anything that's familiar in there. Tonight's actually a full moon, I believe. No matter where we are in the world, we can see that if there aren't a lot of clouds. But I might be asking you to find a constellation, and it may take us time to locate it. So we have to understand that it takes time to have understanding. We may see the same stars. We may see the same mountain range right there. We might see the words constellation in the night sky, but it might take each of us a different rate to make sense of what it is that we're seeing. So for those of us who have quick processing skills, that means that that task is going to be quick, automatic, and we're going to be able to do it with ease. For others, slow processing speed means that it's going to take them longer to do the task. And different students also associate levels of effort with how much time they think it's going to take. Processing speed at school is important because kids compare themselves to others. They look to see how quickly other students get started on their tasks, and they also compare how quickly they themselves can get started. So this could happen at school and of course at home. Most of these processing activities relate to pencil and paper tasks and computers, but then there are also the daily routines that we do every day. In the morning, of course, getting up and getting regulated with our attention and energy, brushing teeth, doing one thing at a time. It could include dinner, of course, and going to sleep at night. So one of the ways in which we assess processing speed can be through the WISC. So I have up here, I know it may be hard to see, but I have a sample set of WISC scores. And what you'll see is that there are these 5 indices. One is verbal ability, one is visual spatial, then there's fluid reasoning, then there's working memory and processing speed. And here the processing speed, if you notice the pattern in these numbers, the index for the scores in the processing speed index are totally different from all the other scores. In this case, these subtest scores need to fall between 8 and 12 to have scores in the average range. So anytime you see scores that are higher than 12, then that means these abilities, these scores are superior. They're in the above average range, with the exception of processing speed. So for this student, it looks as if the skills relating to coding and simple search don't exist because they're a 1 and a 5, whereas all the other scores are at least a 12 or higher. So this is a student then who can use words to express themselves, can see and make sense of visual spatial designs, can reason fluidly with their ideas, looking at visual imagery that's changing patterns and shape and design. And then let's talk for a moment about working memory. Working memory is the ability to hold one thing in mind while doing something else. In this case, these two subtests, the digit span and picture span, these are pretty abstract kinds of tasks. And students have to hold on to the information that they see or that they hear, hold on to it, do something with it, and then be able to provide it. In real life, if we were to extrapolate what these scores might mean for the student who has high average scores, that means that the student would be able to work on math. In other words, know what the procedure is that they're solving while thinking about the facts that they need to complete the problem. Working memory can impact more than just math. It could be that it impacts reading comprehension. Students have to be able to read from a book or listen to a book. It could be listening comprehension. And they have to recall what happened in the first chapter. Even if the second chapter is moving on to new characters, they have to recall the first characters that they had read about or listened to earlier. So holding on to different elements, even if they're not active in that scene, is really important. And then active working memory is important in the written expression because there's so much of writing that is simultaneous. We have to be able to remember all of the spelling rules, punctuation rules, capitalization rules, word order or grammar. We have to be able to hold on to all of these elements as we write down our ideas. Students with weak working memory ability tend to be able to do one thing quite well. And although this profile doesn't show it, when I see very low scores in working memory, it tends to mean that students dive deep in one area at a time because it's hard to balance a lot of different moving parts. So they tend to become experts in one area. But in this case, this profile shows quite strong skills. For this student, the area of concern is processing speed. So this is a child who was not able to score in the average range even on two separate tasks. One's coding and one is symbol search. These are pencil and paper tasks that are timed. They're highly tied to visual detail. So a student has to be able to cross out a design or inhibit crossing out a design, depending on the pattern. And I spend some time speaking about processing speed here. Whoops, I want to go back. Because what happens is that students tend to think of themselves as learners based on the processing speed index, because that's where they're comparing themselves to other kids in class. They want to be as fast as others. Now in this profile, this student has superior verbal ability and superior visual spatial ability, as well as reasoning. So this is a student who might be thinking about all the possible answers that might fit into a very small square or line that is associated with a worksheet, either on their desk or either on their computers that they need to upload at some point. And they're enjoying thinking about the ideas. So by the time the student is ready to then fill in the short answer and choose among all the possible ideas that they've got, it's probably time to end the assignment. So these are students who take longer because they enjoy the thinking and haven't yet chosen what's most salient in the answer that they need to write or type. So processing speed tends to really ding kids who aren't fast, because then they begin to anticipate the next writing assignment, which they may begin to dread or they may begin to avoid because they realize they're going to have to be faster than they really are, and it's going to be perceived as effortful. So what they may do in the meantime is write the minimum or blame the clock that they didn't have enough time. So you may be familiar with some of these. This might be something that you've heard before. Maybe you've heard other creative kinds of responses that students have. But what that means is that we're always tapping students who have weak processing speed. We're always asking them to prove to us that their processing speed is slow. So as an educational therapist, I'm always asking, which is the most important part of an assignment? Is it important to be quick? Or is it okay to take one's time but do one's best work? So we'll talk about this a little bit more, but I wanted to go over at least one way that processing speed and working memory are assessed. And before I leave this slide, I just want to say that for many students, difficulties with working memory can overlap with issues of attention. Because if we're not paying attention to something that we've heard or something that we've seen or even something that we've done, then it won't be encoded and we won't be able to retrieve it later. And I call students who are like this consistently inconsistent or consistently, yeah, I said that. It goes both ways, consistently inconsistent and inconsistently consistent. So I'll leave this slide for now. And we'll talk about what processing speed impacts in students when they are experiencing a slow processing speed. It impacts all their daily routines. We talked about kids who are needing a lot of prompting or extra time to get out of bed, to get dressed, to brush their teeth, to eat, to grab their backpack, to grab anything else that they take to school with them. And then, of course, to remember those same items when they're returning home, plus any homework. In class, processing speed impacts academic tasks because they're not able to complete tasks in a timely manner. And then sometimes for the kids who have very quick processing speed, they finish very quickly, but they may have gone through the entire, activity or worksheet or project so quickly that they didn't pay enough attention to what they were doing, and they have to go back later and redo items. And some children really bristle at being asked to go back and look at their initial responses. They really bristle at having to elaborate. They feel like their first answer is good enough. And it can create some tension when adults are asking students to bring more of themselves to a task. Processing speed can impact social interactions, not just in terms of language, but also in terms of picking up social cues among group activities. They may take time to enter conversations. They may take time to participate in conversations. They may take time to end them. Sometimes there are groups of kids that get together and break up, and they walk into different directions on the lunch yard. And students with slow processing speed may be still thinking about what they might want to say, and the conversation's now over. So it's hard to keep up with moving topics. And then processing speed can impact students who have difficulty with emotional regulation, not just attentional regulation, because they may need more time to process their emotions and talk it through, or they may need a break before they can talk it through and reflect. So processing speed can really be an issue. Now, I'll just add here, in addition to what you see on the slide, that when a student has difficulty with active working memory, it means that in the moment, they may not be recalling everything that's important to that activity, whether it's academic or social or emotional. So those students with active working memory issues need prompts in the moment, even though we wish as adults that we've told them once, that now that we've told them once, can't they remember it for the future? But we find that students with active working memory need continual prompts, just as students do with difficulties in their attention. So when you have a child who has these issues, it can really take a lot out of one's day. An otherwise pleasurable activity can become one that's fraught with some tension. So do processing speed skills occur on their own is this question here. And, a lot of our processing speed issues are related to other cognitive abilities. So often students have multiple issues that are simultaneous or co-occurring. They may have comorbid diagnoses, but it could be that these issues just show up together. As you can imagine, there's likely a lot of anxiety when students are either feeling like they can't ever catch up, or they're overwhelmed with too much that's in front of them, or if they also might have a learning disability relating to reading or writing or math or language, that these are different issues that impact how quickly students can get through assignments on their own. Most students want to be able to do everything independently. They want to be able to navigate their world autonomously. They have their own sense of inner command. And then they have to kind of adjust with any adults at school or at home who are asking those students to do things differently or more quickly or more easily. So that can really be difficult. And I think I've mentioned just briefly that, we can see co-occurring ADHD and anxiety and slow processing speed. And a lot of times we kind of put all of these issues into, we kind of confuse the issues. And so sometimes what I like to do is make sure that what we're looking at, we're clear about, so that we can give the appropriate prompts for that student or that child can get through that activity with the sense of confidence and with the sense of assuredness, and knowing that it's okay to ask for help, and it's also okay to receive it. We may not call it help, but these are students who, if they want to be able to meet their outcomes, they're going to need support from somewhere. And if they haven't developed it within themselves, then knowing that they can rely on this teacher or this teacher's assistant or a peer or a parent or a sibling or a friend, that's really comforting. And truthfully, we do that in our adult lives all the time. So I like to make sure that students in school age years are learning how to do this early on to avoid feelings of overwhelm and avoid feelings of feeling stuck. So I'm often asked if processing speeds can improve over time. And I think it's quite ironic that I have a picture of a race car in slow-mo, because I think it just brings up all of our expectations of what we expect students to be able to do at different grade level expectations. And so the answer is, being an educational therapist, to what are processing speed skills related? What is it that we're asking the child to perceive? Are they looking at words? Is it visual verbal input, or is it signs, pictures, or numbers? And that would be visual nonverbal input. And then what's the output? What's the child being asked to do to show that learning took place? Was the student asked to speak? Was the student asked to use their fingers and either type or manipulate objects, maybe to show a math concept? Is the student needing to form letters legibly? Is the student being asked to move their body or parts of their body, maybe painting or maybe pantomiming or theater? So in asking about what processing speeds are related, then we can look at whether or not processing speeds can improve over time, because I see that students tend to keep the same pace throughout their school career. But what they can do is improve processing speed as they relate to other kinds of skills that are involved in the task. I'll talk a little bit more about this soon. So here we'll talk about some strategies that help. And I love this picture because it's got all these different cars. Some look like clunkers, some look like speedsters, and yet they're all at the same starting line. So again, I question our assumptions about what we expect students to be able to do quickly and within whatever time frame. Oh, I think I'm going to talk with you just for a moment about, I had alluded just a moment ago to this same line that all the cars are parked along, right? I think that means that we're thinking that all students within a classroom are being asked to do the same thing. And for the students that I work with who are twice exceptional, meaning that there's giftedness and learning issues, we have to really look at their learning environment to make sure that their needs are being met, because not everyone is starting in the same location as it looks like they're starting here on this floorboard. And the way in which I introduce that is using this slide, which is looking at what needs to exist in a learning environment for students to really find joy in learning. So I'm just briefly going to talk about these 5, which are intellectual, social, emotional, creative, and physical. And we can go around this in any way we want, but I'll just talk about intellectual. We have to make sure that when we're asking students to learn, that they're learning in an area that they're interested in and that they feel is challenging. But when we say that the content is challenging and interesting, it also has to support their weaker executive functioning skills, their weaker abilities in knowing how and when to do things, not just what they're learning. Another environment is creative, which means that we have to make sure that students have choice. So if they're reading on a topic, is there an option between 1 or 2 books to read? Or if they're needing to show what they've learned, do they have to write a formal paragraph, or can they write a poem? Can they write a screenplay? Can they write lyrics to a song? Is there creative choice in showing what was learned, not just accessing the curriculum? I'm going to move over for a moment to social. So this has to do with students feeling like they belong in a group and feeling like they know what their roles are. So a lot of times teachers teach to the entire class, but sometimes teachers break up the class and pair students up. Or maybe there'll be a small group. So there could be pairs or groups of 3, 4, and 5. And for students who have a slow processing speed, or who might need more reminders because their active working memory is weaker, they're going to need more prompting in that group. And the teachers or the adults at home can help support their children in these areas. And what's important about that kind of support is that the students then know what their role is in the group or in the pairs, and they know what the other students' roles are. And so that way that the group can meet shared outcomes. So it's kind of like giving more explicit instruction, even though it's a social activity. The next environment I can talk about is somewhat related, and that's the emotional environment, and that's ensuring that students feel safe. So for example, if it's a student with slow processing speed, is it safe for them to advocate for extended time? Or is it safe for them to receive the prompts from a teacher because they didn't remember all of the steps of a multi-step assignment? So emotional safety is important for both making mistakes, which are expected, and also for showing areas that they really love. And then the fifth environment is physical, and that means that students are able to use movement to engage in learning. So that means someone who has a higher activity level can walk around the classroom or maybe move from one seat in the classroom to another without disruption. So in order to do that, often students have to make an arrangement with the teacher of that classroom. So there's agreed upon place to go. Sometimes I like to look at levels. Can the students sit at their assigned seat, but then is there a place on the carpet or a place against a bookshelf or a place to walk to that looks like it may be near the pencil sharpener? So just to review, these are 5 environments that we'd like to have in place so that we don't, one, over focus on one element, because when kids are misunderstood, the adults tend to focus on the emotional regulation, and they tend to focus on the behaviors that show up when students are no longer engaged in their learning. So there's a lot to be done when we're really clear about what students are being asked to see, hear, do, and show how they've learned. So there are different expectations at these different developmental stages. And in elementary school, it's very easy to provide prompting for students because they're at an age where we expect students to receive it. So we establish routines in the classroom, at home. We make sure that there's both structured time and unstructured time. We ensure that students are able to navigate spaces easily and have time for those kinds of transitions to go from one preferred task to another, or maybe a non-preferred task, and then arranging what order activities can be presented in. It's hard to read, but this yellow box with the white writing reiterates what I just mentioned about allowing time for transitions. So for a student who has a slower processing speed, we can expect that items getting into the backpack or out of the backpack aren't going to happen quickly. I've seen teachers assist a student at a desk, by taking something out of their hands or off of their desktop and putting it in their backpack, just because there isn't enough time to allow all students to be able to pack up. So giving students extra time for that can be helpful. And then another time that's helpful for a routine is for pickup and drop off. When we're picking up kids from school, checking the backpack to make sure that all the materials are there. I tend to guide parents to say, show me your assignment sheet, or show me your handouts, or show me your book. Like, don't tell me, like if I ask, do you have it? And the child says, yes, of course, from the back seat. I'd rather just see it with my own eyes before I drive away, because then before we've left the curb, we can still, go back to the building and get what's needed if it's missing. The green box is really a great one, because we need to be able to check that the student is accurately perceiving instructions and directions. We tend to understand that students in elementary school are going to be able to remember one thing at a time. And so we seem to have more patience in elementary school. Okay, what have you been asked to do? Can you say it in your own words, or can you repeat what I've said? And of the two, repetition or rephrasing is the most effective way to find out or to informally assess that a student understood the directions. Because a student might be able to restate it, but that doesn't mean they really are going to be able to retrieve it later. It doesn't really mean they've encoded it, but they're great at parroting. So if you're able to ask a student to tell you in their own words what they think they're expected to do, it's a great assessment, because you can reiterate or reframe or elaborate or clarify. The turquoise box is asking for the adults to prompt students to initiate tasks. And a prompt for initiating tasks is do it now, or listen now, or start now. There could be a prompt where we are giving, well, actually not a prompt, but we may be providing feedback. So we let students know that they're on the right path, that the progress they're making is exactly what we were expecting, that they're, of course, meeting expectations, and that's very pleasing to receive. So in terms of active working memory, we're asking students to recall and build on past successes. So if a student gets stuck or gets overwhelmed, we can often interrupt by saying, well, remember the activity we did last Tuesday? You had a hard time getting started, but once you got started, it really was smooth sailing after that. So reminding students that they've had past success and helping them recognize that and setting the stage for their continued progress. Now, the blue box has to do with the strategy of asking students to be self-aware with accuracy. So I have in quotes words to say, like, I notice how well you are doing X, like being really specific with what it is they're doing. And then asking whether or not the student can request something for next time. So it's kind of like having a conversation that's reflective, talking about what the student is doing and ensuring that the student is aware of their process of learning, and that that student is encoding that experience for next time when they may be able to ask for help or ask for extra time or ask to be reminded of next steps. The purple box has to do with the fact that in the elementary school years, we are expecting that students are learning to write. And so we know that they're not going to be able to keep up the pace. We know that they're not going to remember punctuation necessarily. And we also know that within the time period that they're writing, that they could do a better job if they write fewer words. So maybe they're allowed bulleted answers. They may be allowed to dictate to somebody, so someone else can be their scribe. They can, once they've shown mastery, not have to do anything else. They can have choice. I mentioned earlier, maybe they won't write words, maybe they can draw a doodle or in other way point to the answer as opposed to having to write it out fully. And it's important to look at what we're providing students to write on, because we have to make sure that those pages aren't overwhelming and filled with words. We need to make sure that there are fewer items per page and a lot more white space. So in middle school, oh, I skipped that. In middle school, it's more of the same, except for the fact that adults want students to be more independent. And what I'm seeing in middle school is that teachers, even the teachers who are really lovely in class, when they've given directions once, they may not seem to think that they need to repeat the directions. And one direction that they tend to tell the class as a whole is that if they have any questions, they can come in or stay in during lunch or recess. And sometimes the students that I tend to work with are least likely to remember to stay in at recess or lunch when the time comes. So in middle school, even though teachers seem to think that students should already be autonomous and should already be confident and recalling things, that's really when students need continued supports that they received in elementary school. Because if the students could be successful and independent, which is all they really want to be able to do, they would be successful and independent. So in middle school, I suggest that the supports continue, even when parents think that it seems like a crutch. I assure them that students aren't taking advantage of the situation. They really want to be successful. And the earlier recommendations that were provided in elementary school should continue for the students who need it. But they tend to need to be delivered in a way by a trusted adult who respects the students and that the student feels respected. Without that relationship, there could be continued tension. And then we all know that when students begin to resent a teacher or blame a situation, they tend to feel that way through the rest of the semester. So it's really difficult to kind of repair that situation. Maybe there will be a question about that in the end, but I'll keep going for now. And then in high school, it's really important because a lot of the students who are lagging in the skills that we're talking about in terms of processing speed and active working memory, they still need supports, but they won't accept it from just anybody. So it's important to talk with high school students to find out who they're comfortable receiving support from. Will it be a peer? Will it be one of their favorite teachers? It doesn't mean that every teacher is someone that they trust and support, but can one be identified? So again, a peer or a teacher or somebody at home or a tutor or a coach, someone who can provide the extra support so that students can be feeling confident, because the workload increases. So in high school, the tension is that there's a greater amount of work, and then there are fewer supports. And then there's the added concern about what will take place post-graduation. So are students also needing to juggle applications to college? Are they thinking about learning a skill or going into the workforce? So high school means that a lot of these skills need to continue to be supported. And a lot of times parents will say, well, you know, if you give my child that kind of support, it's not like the real life. But in real life, it's quite easy for college accommodations to be provided. In fact, it's easier in college than it is in middle school. Wouldn't you agree? So in college, students can continue to be supported for both working memory and processing speed, as well as any of their learning issues. And adults, I think many of us in this audience could easily share ways in which we support ourselves and way in which we take self-care, how we schedule our days and our evenings, how we pace ourselves throughout the week, what our self-care looks like for those of us who take a longer period of time to do something, and for those of us who move very quickly, but then find later that we need to adjust our initial level of activity. So I think I'm going to be coming to a close here and asking all of us in this conversation to continue to look at what is being expected, and are they realistic expectations? You know, what is the context? I have these different animals. I have a winged animal, land animal, water animal, and a human. And we're not expecting these animals to behave differently in their environment. And yet we tend to do that with students. We want all the students in class to be learning the same information and meeting state standards. And I think we have to really think about, is it important to be fast? Is it possible that we can provide the support so that we can see the potential in students? In terms of strategies, I was mentioning earlier that question that I left unanswered, which is, do processing speed improve over time? And I was saying that I tend not to see that. But when I see processing speed skills strategized with some kinds of games, then I do see processing speed improve because the students have had practice. So if there's a game that can be played quickly, let's say it's a card game or a homemade game, then what happens is students get quicker and quicker at that game because it becomes more familiar, but it's also tied to another learning skill. So if it's a quick card game, processing speed is being timed with motor activity. If it is a game that involves calling out, like maybe Jeopardy, if that's practiced and tied with language skills, processing speed can improve because it's associated with language skills. If it's the memory game, you know, where you have different squares on a grid and you have to match the two that you saw in these certain places on the grid, that processing speed can go more quickly when a child or student has practiced it, because it's associated with visual processing, similar to the slide of the stars in the night sky. If we went out to look at stars with our telescope, we would become maybe more quicker locating the constellations because of the practice that we've had. But I'm not talking about drill. You know, that's not the practice I mean. That will give everyone tremendous anxiety. I'm not talking about turning on a clock and a timer. That could also create a lot of anxiety. But games that feel like fun, that have real world application, that are of interest to the child, means that that child will show greater motivation and interest and persevere even if something's effortful, because they're so interested in it. Remember that practice has to be low key, have personal meaning and interest and motivation, and be joyful. And I think this is the last slide. And that is, in terms of final reflections, consider our busy lives. Consider the influence of the natural world and what we're asking students to learn. And we're coming out of a pandemic. So really, who's rushing anywhere right now? Consider where the support is needed. The goal is autonomy, but no one indicated by which date that autonomy needed to be online. And also consider that what's most important is that the students feel like they have strong self-esteem and confidence in a world that they belong in. and that in a world that they have a lot to offer. In terms of resources, it's hard to read here, but there are several articles. One I pulled from Understood that was specific to processing speed, and another article related to the slide where I showed you the 5 learning environments for twice exceptional learners. And then this is the very last slide. I thank you for having me. I appreciate having the opportunity, and I'd love to open up the conversation now to questions and comments.
Can you see?
If you have a question, can you raise your hand?
Sometimes people put it in the chat. I don't know if you can read in the chat, or would you like me to read it to you?
I see something in the chat. Someone was, Jody was relating to understanding the first chapter and then teasing about comprehending the first sentence. And then here is are there listening versus reading versus math-oriented types of processing speed? Yes, okay, so there is a processing speed related to reading. It's a fluency speed. So when we're looking at reading skills and learning issues, that's definitely an area that we're looking at. So one of the aspects of reading has to do with word attack skills. One of the other skills has to do with fluency, and that's definitely processing speed. So that term can be used differently depending on the learning issue. So, you know, for kids who aren't fluid with their reading, they stop to decode the word. And if too much effort is being placed on stopping and reading, then not enough active working memory space is allowing for conceptual understanding. Because the process of reading is so slow due to the word attack or maybe a limited sight word vocabulary, then it's very hard to hold on to what the meaning is. And some kids, when they are decoding, they can guess words based on the first few letters of the word. And so they kind of look alike, but they may change the meaning of what they're reading, and that alters their reading comprehension. So for reading, there's so much going on. There's the visual processing of the word orthographic figures. There's associating the sound symbol correspondences, the letters to what they sound like. And many of our letters in English have multiple sounds. Then there's the ability to read fluently or with the appropriate processing speed so that students have enough active working memory to really comprehend what the meaning of the sentences are. So yes, that's very specific. I hope that was a good enough answer to go into a little bit of the overlap of looking at the term processing speed in relation to specific reading disorders. Okay, another comment had to do with games and practice. So there are a couple of games, which I happen to have. That I'll show that are a lot of fun. One of the games I absolutely love, I don't know if you can see it with my screen like this, is Blink. Can you see it? Blink. It's an out of the box kind of story, kind of company. So what happens at first when I play with clients is they never win. I'm always winning because I've got intact motor skills and I've got intact visual processing speed skills, and my processing speed is actually quite quick. So what ends up happening is we deal the cards, and students need to look at these nonverbal images, and they need to be able to identify what they see. So what do you see here? So when it was in focus, you saw that there are drops. And I would ask you, what color are they? And you would say, these are yellow drops. And I would say, how many of them are there? You might say 5. And then I might ask you, well, then what do you see on this card? Can you give me the answer that tells me what's on this card? All the elements. So practicing working memory, I see 5 yellow drops. So what ends up happening is we deal the cards, and the way I play it is that students need to match and get rid of their cards by putting them on a pile. And the pile has to match in one of these 3 ways, either form, color, or number. And so students who are maybe not able to indicate their active working memory, they only make matches for number, or they only make matches for color, or they only make matches for the image. As their active working memory starts to improve, then they begin to match for all three: number or color or image. So that also can help with processing speed. So of course, eventually clients then begin to beat me and I never win. So I do see processing speed improve when it is aligned with another academic type skill. And a game like this is a lot of fun, but I would never start quickly or win so quickly that a child would want to cry. You know what I mean? We have to keep intact self-esteem. We have to keep intact the possibility of hope. Another game which is on the market that you could get to at almost any bookstore is Spot It. You know, and they're all different themes of Spot It. And this is a visual imagery task. Language is needed only in terms of being able to label the pictures that are seen. And I know that it shows up. So then a student has a disc and I have a disc. And then one of us has to label what we see that matches. And so the ability to visually scan is important here. And of course, knowing the language of these items and how quickly a student is able to visually process what's on the card. Now, it's not active working memory in this game because everything is here. You know, there isn't anything they have to hold in mind while doing something else. It's just processing speed, but it's associated with visual memory. And then the last one that I can show you is a game called, sounds like fun, doesn't it? Kids love these sounds. Tricky Fingers. I don't know if this is still on the market. It's a Discovery Toys game. And there are different grids. And what I love about it is that these balls are stuck in this square. They can't go anywhere. So as an educational therapist, I love that these balls make a lot of noise, but they can't be dropped all over the floor. And what happens is the students can choose. Again, I love choice in learning. So the student can choose these different designs, and then they've got to manipulate the balls in the place to match the design. Sorry for those of you who are frustrated with these.
Pull it back a drop. Pull it back. Yeah. Back is easier to see than close.
Sorry, I know that's not the best, but they match. And so what's great is that now they become, depending on what the student's issues are, but with these fine motor skills, they can move the balls into place with greater ease. But again, we're practicing, it feels like fun. You know, maybe they can talk at the same time and tell a story. Most times, you know, there may be motoric overflow and their tongue is coming out the corner of their mouth or, you know, towards their chin. But the idea of it is that processing speed can improve when it's paired to another learning skill. And that can make it fun. I love games. I recommend them, board games, playing games. You could go to a bookstore or look online and find different kinds of games that kids would love. But again, if the children feel like there's a lot riding on winning, or if they feel competitive, you know, I wouldn't stress the speed aspect of it. You know, I would just stress the fun of it and then have practice and repetition and review. And then in terms of working memory, if a student is having a hard time playing a game because there's so many rules, then how could they be supported to play that game? Can a card of the rules be written and put on the table or next to the board? That would assist that student in playing that game if there are multiple rules. But I think the best thing is to look for a game that only has one rule or two, and then see how well the student can juggle more complex tasks or more complex steps. Okay. There's a question about Learning RX. I'm not familiar with what that is. And it could be that I'm just not in your regional area. But there are, depending on a child's needs, there can be centers that focus on occupational therapy and motor movement and, you know, other, I don't know if that's what Learning RX does, or if it's, or if Learning RX is specific to learning skills. But with my ed therapy background, I think what's really important is, you know, remember that slide where I was asking you to consider what was the input and what was the output? You know, what is it that the student needs in order to take in information and then show what was learned, and what are the options available to that student? So if there is a location like Learning RX that also takes into account these different ways of working with individual students, then it can be great, but it really depends on the individual student's needs. Okay, and then I see there's a hand up. So Melissa?
Hi, I have a quick question about processing speed and reading programs. Do you have any information on that? Because my son was using the Orton Gillingham reading program, and he was getting frustrated and angry and feeling like it was like a competition with the kids around him. So now they keep on changing his reading programs, and I'm worried because he's in the 2nd grade and he's still not reading.
Yeah, you know, I have more questions than I have answers. What's really important to look at for individual learners is what's really going on. You know, find out what the observations are of different instructors. So include your child's perceptions, but also include the perceptions of the teachers, and see at what point is your child triggered by frustration. And, you know, I've seen all different kinds of things. So some students feel remorse and they blame themselves. Some students blame others, you know, so sometimes it's part of the package when when students compare themselves to others. It could be that the program needs to move at a quicker pace. It could be that Orton Gillingham is very multisensory, for those of you who aren't familiar with that. So it's a multisensory brain-based reading approach that can be quite effective. But like I've said many, many times, even if you're hearing me for the first time, if there isn't a relationship between the child and the adult, you know, the student and the teacher, you know, how is it possible to move forward, even if it's the best program around? So what can be established in the relationship between your child and the teacher? So I've just given you 3 or 4 questions to ask, and I wish you the best with that, but that might be a good place to start because it's a long haul. You know, maybe there need to be more opportunities for rewards, or maybe there need to be more breaks. So you know your child best, and you can be your child's best advocate. And these are the questions I suggest that you start asking different people that you trust on the team.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Good luck with all that. Okay, any other questions? I feel like I went through that very, very quickly.
Somebody was asking about the supports in college and how to get them and how to best support.
Oh, easy answer. So colleges typically accept students with learning disabilities, but they need to have a diagnosis. So the diagnosis can be through a district, it can be through a private individual. Colleges usually accept testing that has been done within the last 3 years. Now, some colleges provide their own testing in their own resource center. I mean, not all colleges, but some programs do. But even though that might be the most economic approach, what happens is that may not kick into place until either the quarter or the semester is over. And in the meantime, a child is struggling. So I suggest that, you know, prior to entering college, that the report is shared with the resource center and that the child is involved, even if the child doesn't have the executive functioning skills to initiate the conversation. It's important for parent and child to go together to the resource center and set everything up in place. And some of the accommodations include early enrollment, so enrolling one-on-one with someone in the center for classes. The center often knows which instructors of certain sections are best and can provide modifications in the classroom. Other accommodations, usually they follow what's in the IEP or what's in the formal assessment, but usually accommodations include a second set of textbooks, you know, notes provided, although with the pandemic, everything is online anyway, so everyone gets downloads of what's been provided, and extended time on tests, which could either be 50% or 100% extended time. And then if they need to take a test with extended time, students need to sign up well in advance for their exams at college. So they're not often thinking about exams early. You know, they may not be thinking about scheduling when to take an exam when they receive the syllabus. They may need prompts to look at the syllabus. You know, they may need prompts to connect the dots between this is the syllabus, these are the dates that are coming up. And even though you're not thinking of them, they're on the calendar. And then contacting the resource center and making arrangements so that the math exam or, whatever it is that needs to be taken there can be taken there. Since the pandemic, some things may have changed, and they may be, students may be able to log on online. I don't know. Usually they're proctored, but I'm not sure how it's being handled across the country. But those are common supports that are offered to college students. And if students need more coaching and support, then I think it's helpful to hire someone that's in that school community or, in that neighborhood that can be helpful. So they can get prompts for daily habits, including, laundry and things like that, things to look ahead when they're not necessarily thinking ahead. So I hope that was helpful. That was really an overview of transitioning to college that really didn't relate to processing speed, but I was happy to give that answer.
I actually think that's an issue for a lot of people, Marcy, in that they have all these supports in place in high school, and then in college, the child is supposed to advocate for themselves all of a sudden, and it just doesn't go that smoothly.
No, and that again has to do with our expectations and the context, because we want kids to be independent, and there's this age that we expect them to be independent, but we know if they're diagnosed with ADHD, there's likely, according to Russell Barclay's work, did I say that right? I didn't say Charles, did I? Russell Barclay's work, that there can be a 30% delay. So students with ADHD are still developing their frontal lobes. They still need prompting through the age of 25. And I think that parents who have kids who have been diagnosed early with ADHD in the elementary school years really have it best, assuming their child is diagnosed, accurately, because they have a better understanding of what will be required through these different stages: elementary, middle school, high school, college, and adulthood. But it is true that students tend to really integrate their lives when they're around 24, 25. But that means parents are in it for the long haul. That means that our children are borrowing our frontal lobes. And we can get frustrated by it, but it won't help. We can get angry, but that even makes things worse. So how is it that we can provide ourselves our own self-care and support the children in our homes and the students in our classrooms without any blaming or any kind of moral, judgments? This is how it is. And I would much rather have a child who has a certain sense of themselves as individuals of the world, despite their slower processing speed, or despite their weak active working memory, or any learning issues that they may have that are co-occurring. We just have to arrange our lives differently to make sure that that child feels a sense of belonging in our family, and that child feels a sense of belonging in that classroom and in that school. And again, growing outwards, any communities beyond your home and within your, neighborhoods and online. For some students, who knows what they're doing online, but they need the same supports in a virtual reality that they need in an actual reality, right? So, we are the loving, caring, knowledgeable, wise adults, but that doesn't mean we're patient ourselves. It doesn't mean that we always speak in a calm voice. And we're parents, we have real lives and things happen very quickly. And kids know rules, and they tend to, in the moment, forget. So they need support. All right, you guys, I feel like people are starting to drop off, and it's probably because it's after the hour and it's later where you are than it is where I am. So unless there are a few more questions, maybe we should wrap up.
Well, we usually wrap up by 9:15. So
then we have time.
We do have some time.
Marcy, I just wanted to piggyback on something that you said, which I think is so important about make whatever we pick for our children, it's very individual to them. And one of the things that you had talked about was making it fun. And when you tie things into that, the fun factor and the person that they're doing it with and having that connection, it makes all the difference. So I just want to.
Yeah, it does. I'm going to have a workshop this weekend with parents of elementary age students. And one of the activities I'll guide them with is planning a mini vacation, whether it happens or not. But, when we go on vacation, which is a short period of time, 4 days, long weekend, maybe a week if we can manage it, we think about what each of the members of our family would enjoy doing. We don't expect that everyone in the family is going to love every activity, but because we're a family, we do something together. That's how we show that we care for each other. But, the idea is, how can we arrange our days, our weekends? We've just come out of a pandemic where we kind of lost our boundaries. So here we are trying to reestablish them. I think it's nice to find ways to connect and learn how to find that kind of lightness and joy, because everything around us is changing. The world is change. So how can we strengthen the relationships that we have with each other so that we can step into that change together? Some kids are afraid of change, and then some kids thrive on it. So, in the family unit, how can we arrange for that? In the classroom, how can we arrange for that? There was a period of time in my career I learned about teaching to a classroom. And in that way, we thought about students, and it's called the format system. We knew that at any one time, there would be a quarter of a circle of students, 25% of students who might be quite stressed with that activity. So maybe it was drama, 25% of the kids might be really out of their comfort zone. Maybe the other quarter of the students might be out of their comfort zone in a class discussion or something that's very highly verbal. Maybe another quarter would be stressed in an art activity. Maybe another quarter would be stressed with PE or physical activity. So we have to think about all different kinds of learners. We don't expect that everyone is going to be on board at the same time, at the same rate. And I think being able to plan a vacation or to plan a short activity where everyone can find joy is helpful. And as soon as it becomes tense, as soon as there's tension or a potential argument, we don't want those neurons developing with that kind of tension, that kind of sense of stuckness. We want to let it go and just simply say without blame, this doesn't feel right any longer. So let's go find something to do that isn't this. And yourselves, who you're talking about and thinking about. But, that helps. That's kind of loving to let go of something that isn't working. It's loving for ourselves, that's self-care, and also for those that we are having expectations of that isn't going to work in that moment. Claire?
Hi, I'm wondering, are schools recognizing slow processing speed as a learning disability? For someone like the student that you showed the WISC scores for, where they've got all these, great, I had a son whose WISC scores looked sort of like that, where, high in, fifth grader with an 11th grader vocabulary, but, decision-making speed of a kindergartner. Are they recognizing that now?
I think it varies. I think it varies. I think that, I think it varies. I think that processing speed is being looked at as part of a diagnosed academic area. So it may be looked at in relation to a specific learning disability in reading, writing, or math. Okay. Or yeah, I don't think it is in and of itself identified by districts, but again, districts vary across the country. So yes. I'm not sure. I don't see IEP goals relating specifically to executive functioning. I think that those executive functioning goals have to be embedded in an academic goal or a vocational educational goal or a behavior goal. I think processing speed is, it could be related to, let's say, reading or dyslexia or writing. But I think that it's handled mostly through either extended time, 50% or 100%.
Okay. Do you know anything about what happens into adulthood? Does it stay? Is there anything that can be done? Or do you know much about that?
Well, I mean, in the clients, I don't have many clients, for all of the school years, because I'm always working towards autonomy. And once they meet their goals, they end. But I don't recall that students who are quick slow down. I mean, they learn to do it as a strategy. I don't see students that are slow suddenly become quick. but they become faster at familiar activities, and they only will work harder on those familiar activities when there's a high degree of investment. So there has to be a real world application, and there has to be meaning. Having said that, those same adults who have those issues as kids arrange their lives differently. They don't go into jobs where they have to be quick. So if they're taking phone calls, they're not likely the ones who are having the shortest phone calls and making extra money because of the number of, sales, right? They're likely the problem solvers who are really taking their time to think of every possible solution. So they're not taking jobs where speed is of value. They're taking jobs where fluid reasoning is of value, or visual detail, or language ability, but not necessarily speed. In that kind of a situation, I think that there might be tension. And then that kind of goes into a different category, which is, to what extent do adults divulge any learning issues that they may have in the workplace? Okay. So I think to some extent there can be improvement with processing speed if it's related to other skills that can be clustered together through repetition, review, and high interest. But otherwise, I tend to see the same pace even through adulthood.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think another area would be cooking. I always ask how long or what the student is cooking. Is it something that they've learned by heart and can use their active working memory so the meal's on the table at the same time? Or is it that dinner is going to be ready like 2 hours later? Like maybe the salad was ready at 7 and then, like the side was ready at 8. It's like you just don't want to be that kind of a chef, So it takes additional planning. It takes more time. It takes more support. Maybe there's a sous chef involved. But one of the ways to work at that might be, cooking and preparing meals or baking and getting really good at one recipe that's memorized. So both active working memory and processing speed look like they've improved through repetition. And that would be true because a child or an adult knows more by heart what to pull out of the pantry versus the refrigerator. Knows where the bowls are, knows which pans to pull out, knows the order of those steps. So that's a real life way of working on both active working memory and processing speed. But, a lot of times kids don't feel that that's relevant because what they're facing is homework and they just want homework to get done. They want to be relieved of the burden of a lot of homework. So, going and playing games isn't going to help that kind of an academic student who wants to do really well, has a sense of perfectionism, and wants to do everything just right. But then the time that it's taking to get everything right is more than they have to do the complexity of the task. So we always have to balance what's more important. Is it the speed or the accuracy? Is it the accuracy or just completing the assignment for credit? Is it playing games that seem to have no relevance to those tasks? So cooking to me seems to be a task that kind of fits the bill. It's relevant, it feeds us. It's, if it's baking, it's sweet, we love it. So, and it can be a family activity. So it can be something we do together. Whoever the baker or cook is can get accolades because people tend to really enjoy being fed. So that's a nice way to kind of work at it. But even in adulthood, back to your original question, Claire, even in adulthood, I don't think that's an adult that's going to pick a quick meal that would take just 10 minutes. They're going to need the day to get ready if they know themselves well. And I think that's really the message, is to know yourself well, to know your child well, to know your students well, and look for what can be supportive in the environment and watch out for what could be a stressor in the environment.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome.
So that's what a wonderful way to end and to sort of close things up. Claire, thank you so much for your questions. And Marcy, thank you for so much information.
You're very welcome.
Fantastic, really. I need time to process it all.
Take your time.
So thank you everyone for coming. I hope to see you all next month. And Marcy, let's keep in touch. There's so much to learn.
My pleasure. All right. Good night, everybody.
Take good care. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.
Thank you again.
Thank you. Have a good night, guys. Bye.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, we can turn off the recording.